most likely going to be they're most likely going to be in a light howitzer unit when you hit your future battalion command. And so there's that as well. But HRC does like to diversify you in weapon systems. Does anyone have any questions, or I'll pass it to Zach for more?
Yeah, I'll just add on. So if you honestly, if you stay in the same trajectory of if you go to a heavy unit and a heavy unit is like a lieutenant, or a light unit and a light unit is a lieutenant to a captain, you start to pigeonhole yourself. And if you read kind of how the statistics and how BCAP works, which you all shouldn't really worry about, but like your assessment to becoming a lieutenant colonel and battalion commander, essentially what'll happen is you pigeonhole yourself, and you pretty much stop as a battalion commander. So you would be like a light battalion commander, and that kind of prevents you from being a divarti commander one day. So like I've been a light artillery officer my entire career, and that's kind of the fight that I'm going to have.
So on that note, it's worth considering that where you go as a major, nobody told me this until I was a major. Where you go as a major is what is heavily weighted towards what kind of unit you might command as a battalion commander. So way down the road, if you've done what Cap Skipworth has done, right, and you've stayed light the whole time, you may want to diversify so you have more options for command. That is true in the maneuver world, it's true in the fires world, and I'm just not entirely sure if it's true in sustainment, but it's worth a discussion with your future company, troop, battery commander, and battalion squadron commander. One thing to note with the 777, the Striker artillery, that is probably going to go away in the next couple of years, because towed artillery with the Striker unit slows it down significantly. There's a big truck that actually tows that artillery piece around. And even a really good crew needs about 4 minutes to emplace it, get it down, and get it set so that it can fire. And that's a long time compared to the Paladin, the 109 there, which is self-propelled artillery. So during like the first half of your career, you can probably expect to see a replacement fielded after it's been tested, and you might be the first platoon leader of the 777 replacement. It's some kind of self-propelled artillery piece in a Striker. All right, any questions for them on our artillery pieces? Anybody?
I'd also just add on that for the weapon systems, there's also radar weapon systems. Something that I wasn't aware of as a lieutenant is the radars are extremely important, just like the artillery pieces. They are brigade level assets, and if you're an artillery officer, you might find yourself being a radar platoon leader. That's kind of something new that's happened in the last 12 months. So don't feel discouraged if you're not on the gun line.
Thanks, Zach. All right, so you've heard a lot about HIMARS in the news. That's on the bottom right there. Between the two of you, because you have more experience than I do, what do you think the biggest difference beside range is between MLRS and HIMARS?
It's definitely their placement on the battlefield compared to the other three weapon systems. There is a lot more strategic placement of these weapon systems. While I haven't worked with them directly, I've indirectly gone through exercises where I pretend to be a platoon leader of an LMRS HIMARS unit, and it is very tricky to, I guess, maneuver them through the battlefield, especially in certain terrain. MLRS does have an advantage being self-propelled. However, the logistics of these two weapon systems is also very important. Not that the other three weapon systems are not. You're just more high visibility because of the range, again, that you portray on the battlefield. You are the one that, either gets maneuver out of a tight situation, or you are the ones that are starting off the battle. And so it's super important, especially in the first couple minutes of the fight, that you're on and you're where you are and you're able to get out once you do fire.
Thanks, Kat. Yeah. So what you would expect then at the brigade and below is you might see MLRS and HIMARS in your battle space, but they're not going to necessarily be supporting you, because those are the systems that divisions and corps are using to shape the deep fight beyond the line of contact. But you might have to sustain them. So future logisticians, you may have a supporting relationship with these artillery units, and you might even have to provide security as a maneuver organization, even though they're not really shooting in support of your unit. Does that make sense? Zach, anything to add on that?
No, I think you said it best.
Okay.
Sir, I got a question.
Go.
Could one of you elaborate on the different challenges and the difference between being a PL for a rocket unit versus a lighter heavy unit? Just what is like the difference in structure? I remember like each platoon has so many like strikers, but how's the difference with rockets?
Go ahead, Zach.
So with a rocket unit, if you're a rocket platoon leader, pretty much the difference between like a rocket platoon leader and like a line platoon leader. For instance, if you were like a 777 platoon leader, you would have 3 sections, so 3 guns and an FDC. You'd have roughly 42 soldiers that you would be in charge of. Whereas if you were in a HIMARS or MLRS unit, I think you have like 6 soldiers and you're the platoon leader and the FDO. Fire direction is significantly different when you're looking at rocket battalions versus the traditional artillery line units. There's a lot of different types of computations. So with HIMARS and MLRS, a lot of the procedures are automated, really, versus with traditional artillery being substantially more manual, a little more intensive, and Cat can actually go into that a little bit deeper as far as like the gunnery side of the artillery.
Yeah, with being specifically a platoon leader, your scope of duties and responsibilities won't change per weapon system. However, how you, again, maneuver the battlefield is different. With a rocket unit, basically all of your weapon systems are spread apart. You're probably taking more than a kilometer space per your gun line. And so as a platoon leader, you also have to acknowledge the risk of maneuvering from gun to gun or remaining in place based on the status of the battlefield. With your light howitzers, you'll probably, if you are airborne, you'll jump with them, and then you'll place them as needed. And then from there, you're more in a condensed space. You're able to command and control those a little bit better based on your platoon. Your heavy paladin units, you are also gifted probably an up-armored Humvee as a platoon leader. If you're a fire direction officer, you're granted another self-propelled vehicle you're able to maneuver with the paladins. However, you're also kind of more spaced apart. But again, the scope and the duties won't change as much. Probably a little bit more logistics on the gun line side versus the rockets regarding like ammunition, fuel. But other than that, it's pretty good.
Does that answer your question, Grace?
Yes, sir.
And go ahead, Isaac.
I was just wondering, so how might these weapon platforms and like field artillery units work with armor units and armor platforms? Because I know armor platforms also have a pretty long reach. I just am unsure about how those two work together.
So basic answer is if you're in an armored brigade combat team, you're gonna have paladins. Right? If you're a striker or light, you'll have tube artillery that's towed. And I'll turn over to them to talk a lot more.
So I guess specifically, if you're looking at the way artillery works in conjunction with tanks, you know, in the armored fight, it's not nearly as effective as it would be within the light fight, just because you know, with the way armor formations move and the way they fight, typically your artillery is just, I mean, it's not as substantial as it is within the within like a regular IVCT fight. So if you're in a squadron doing you know, cavalry type stuff, really truthfully artillery doesn't matter for the most part, because most of the time the squadron's out in some type of screen, or they're beyond the forward line of troops and artillery is not in place yet. So typically they're working more in conjunction with their M-towed mortar systems, so the 120 mortar systems. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's typically how you fight it in an armored formation.
Yeah, and I was when I was a fire support officer, I was in an armor unit as my first company. And if you're a fire support officer, you have a Bradley. And those Bradley fighting vehicles I mean, they can't keep up with tanks because tanks have a jet engine, but you're able to maneuver with them. And so artillery would obviously be supporting in the back, as Captain Skipworth said. But in terms of maneuvering with your armor unit, you would be in a Bradley and you'd be tied to a platoon the whole time. And so if they ever need fire support, you're there. They say, "Hey, we have this mission. Can you call up to the Paladins and fire this mission for us?" And so it was cool. I spent over 30 days in the field, twice over at Fort Bliss with them, and it was definitely awesome to get that maneuver experience as well. And that's what's cool about field artillery, because this branch just has a well-rounded experience for lieutenants getting into the career, because you do experience everything. One day I got a call from the maneuver XO. They said, "Hey, do you want to TC a tank today? We don't have a lieutenant." I'm like, "Okay, sure, let's do it." And so there's different opportunities that come your way too that you will never get from, you know, another branch unless you are armor. But it was awesome.
So Kat, since you brought it up, would you please explain, and you may have experienced both ways, how FSOs specifically integrate into maneuver formations? Like, who do they work for? You know, why do they have essentially two identities because they live in two worlds at the same time, etc.?
Absolutely. And Zach, you can step in after this. In terms of Fort Bliss, so if you're in a division artillery or DIVARTY, there's not a lot of them left, but I don't think they're going away anytime soon. You are kind of split amongst your maneuver counterparts and your artillery family. And so you're assigned and you're organic usually to at least for me, to the artillery battery that you're in. And then they kind of loan you out to the maneuver. But you still train with the maneuver units, but you still have obligations over here to the field artillery. And so you are kind of stretched. And as a leader, especially as a fire support officer, you are kind of the point of contact with your boss, a battalion FSO, as to where to go. And that leader will usually tell you where to go. But it's kind of your first test in leadership, whether you have 4 service members that directly report to you, or 10, just based on the size of your fire support company. You are kind of that messenger in that sense, along with all your other responsibilities you have to do. But it's kind of cool again to see 2 worlds and kind of their challenges and their successes as they maneuver the battlefield.
Zach, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say the short answer is as an FSO, you work for your battalion FSO. Your maneuver commander is going to say you work for him, but you actually work with him or her. Like as an FSO, your job is it's more of a customer service business, and you're there to provide and advise the maneuver commander on fires, but you work for the battalion or brigade FSO, depending on what capacity you're serving.
Kind of a cultural shift from the last 20 years, because we've gone back to having DeVardy's, gone back to having a strong artillery organization identity. My company FSO, when I was a company commander, Dennis Hilburn, absolutely thought, and I thought he worked for me, not really for the battalion FSO. And that reflects the change in how we expect to operate at the brigade and above in the future, where we see the predominant use of force is at the division level and above to set conditions for brigades and below to maneuver. So you got this huge, both in terms of scope and scale, fires fight happening at the division and corps level to just allow brigades and battalions to maneuver on the battlefield. I think that speaks to what Captain Skipworth just said. Anything else you guys want to hit on this slide? All right, let's move to the next one. I'm making this as legible as possible. There we go. All right, back to you guys.
All right, so there's a lot of things you have to memorize when you get to BOLC. These are 2 that I recommend you memorize. This is more on the gunnery side. Again, the mission and the goal of the firing battery. This is directly from the training circular that you will all read together as a class if you do head to BOLC. But essentially, you can read it. The mission of the firing battery: destroy, neutralize, or suppress the enemy. So destroy, we're just only talking about 30% or 30% of the battlefield in terms of whatever your maneuver brethren or whoever the commander is decides to do on the battlefield. Neutralize is 10%, and suppress doesn't really have a number. And on the fire support side, usually they'll say 3 to 5%. But really, suppression, again, is just ensuring that if there is anything going on with the maneuver, you're able to kind of deter that weapon system from firing anymore or doing anything. And so indirect cannon, mortars, rocket, missile fires, that's essentially your scope of your weapon systems. And to integrate all fire support assets into combined arms operations. That's basically stating that you are a collective fight. So again, our field artillery is not the only one on the battlefield. You're able to have that relationship, as Major Harrison said, with the different combined arms community that is also assisting in this fight. And then the goal of the firing battery is to achieve accurate first round fire for effect on a target. Fire for effect, meaning you are hitting steel on steel, whatever your target is. That's essentially what your goal is to fire at. Any questions there?
No questions, guys?
I have one.
Go.
So obviously with the goal being accurate first fire per effect, that involves a lot of communication with, and I imagine coordination between your ground units and even like aviation units, and then. It's indirect fire, so you don't have direct line of sight, I imagine. How does that communication play into that goal? Or like what level of communication, I would say?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you in one of the first chapters you read, you talk about kind of the gunnery team. And so you have your fire support, where they're the eyes, and then you have the fire direction center, and those are the people that process the mission, and then you have the gun line, which actually fires the mission. And so you all may have done a call for fire before, or at least have a handbook that tells you how to call for fire. But essentially, from the fire support side or the maneuver side, you receive a fire mission, and then that fire mission goes to the fire direction center, and they are the hub that calculates the mission and then sends it to the gun line, and the gun line fires it. And this is one of the drills you'll perform over and over and over again once you do get to your unit, and also in Bullock. And you're able to see kind of the art and science to achieving accurate first round fire for effect on a target. And within there, and it's not on this slide, but there are 5 requirements that also go into accurate fire as well. And anything from the fire supporter ensuring that, you know, they have the accurate target, they have the accurate grid for it, all the way to the computational procedures and ensuring that those are good to go as well.
That's your question, Hayden?
Yes, sir.
Would one of you elaborate, or Zach, you have some, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Yeah, just real quick. So, direct line of sight's not necessary. Typically, once you get above the company level, once you're in the battalion, brigade, division level, you start to get into targeting. Typically, you're using ISR platforms. You're using aviation platforms to pick your target and prosecute the target from there. So.
Would one of you explain how our doctrine lays out when you employ observed fires versus unobserved fires, and where you think observed or unobserved fires are going to become necessary in the future, where we probably haven't been doing that for at least the last 20 years or so?
I know that when we were deployed, kind of what Zach was talking about, we worked jointly with the Marines, but the Marine fire supporters would seldom go out. We kind of had, eyes in the sky that told us, the grid as to where to fire. So really interesting that asset to do what it's supposed to do was very important, but that was really all my experience with that.
Sir, Major Harrison. So yeah, just what you're talking about with unobserved fires, really it has to do with the rules of engagement and then the collateral damage assessment. So a battalion or brigade FSO would typically make that assessment. If we're in a coin environment like we've been in Afghanistan and Iraq, we're going to put more of a precedence on collateral damage and the ROE. But if we were to get into a LISCO environment or large scale combat operations like we're seeing in Ukraine and Russia, I don't really think ROE or collateral damage is going to be something that we would consider. And so unobserved fires would probably be completely acceptable at that point.
Well, thank you. I appreciate both your comments. That also makes me think about something that might be interesting to this group, which is how we do counter battery fire. How do you plan it? And then how do you execute
it? So counter battery fire, really that's going to be dependent on where you're going to put your radars and radar acquisition based on where the what we call the POO, so that's the point of origin, and then where it picks up the point of impact, the POI, and then from there the radar would send the acquisition to the nearest artillery unit, you know, depending on if it could range it, that enemy firing battery or not, and then prosecute the target from there.
So part of an artillery officer's job then, right, in conjunction with the warrants at the brigade level, often who are the genuine experts, and then down in the artillery battalion, is where do you position your radar? Where do you position these sensors that allow you to see outgoing and incoming fire so that you can return accurate indirect fire when the enemy's shooting at you? So it's a two-way range, direct and indirect. And where you place those sensors is important because you don't want them to be destroyed. You don't want them to find your radar, nor do you want your radar to have to reposition unnecessarily because it takes a while. All right, let's move into general Q&A. What questions do you have of these two exceptionally experienced captains about artillery, the Army, life, or in Captain Grizzle's background, Virginia Tech graduate stuff? Go.
How have you seen infantry officers either help or hinder the operation in terms of that top-down fire support planning, as well as helping with the tactical mission tasks?
I would say that infantry officers really don't hinder the fire support side of planning. I would say that some infantry officers can have a tendency to, especially when you're talking at the company level, right? You're talking about a fresh lieutenant versus a captain that is, you know, MCCC qualified, you know, has been to Ranger School, probably has some form of operational experience. A lot of times, what you'll see, in my opinion, is you'll have that infantry company commander basically tell that fire support lieutenant, like, this is exactly what we're going to do. It's going to be X, Y, and Z. And they won't take into consideration what that lieutenant knows, or what that lieutenant can basically interpret what's called the annex delta, which is your fire's annex, and explain that to the infantry company commander. So I would say the only way they can really hinder fire support is if it's not a collaborative experience. It's more of the company commander is just like taking hold of owning fires rather than allowing the FSO to do their job and plan fire.
Yeah, when I was in the maneuver unit, one of my first interactions with the company commander, he looks at me, he's like, okay, so what do we do with you? Like, he had no idea kind of the scope of responsibilities that the fire supporter had. And so I said, sir, and part of your job as a fire supporter is to sell fires. You're kind of like a salesperson mixed with a consultant as to, you know, what you can offer to the maneuver. And you kind of have to always remind them what your capabilities are. But you're like, listen, this is what I can do on the battlefield. You know, don't say like I'm Bullock trained. That's silly. But just be confident and understand, you know, what your company commander needs, but also what you can offer. And then after I, you know, briefed my capabilities brief, I just did it during a company training meeting. They're like, oh, you can do all of that? I'm like, yeah, we're kind of cool. So it's, yeah, that would be my advice. Also, their definitions of like destruction, for example, in their mind, they're like, oh, 90% of the battlefield needs to be wiped. Our destroy, again, is 30%. And then that'll be a discussion for another day as to like why. But that's kind of laying out the verbiage in the beginning of your, you know, in your maneuver relationship is very important as well.
Go.
Man,
When did you know it was a great time to go back to school, like, timeline wise, how do you know you wanted to go back to school at this specific time? And what was the process for choosing a school and choosing, another degree?
Yeah, absolutely. Solid question. I get this one a lot as well at Bullock. And essentially, the Army will find you in terms of graduate school, starting that as well. I know that there are programs as you head to the career course you're able to do with your career course studies. But in terms of your lieutenant years, I would focus on, immersing yourself in your career. You don't want to get started like too early and then have your lieutenant time be tarnished with graduate school. But at the same time, if your own limits, what if you self-assess and know that this is something that you can handle, go for it. However, there's so many opportunities, and I know Major Harrison kind of spoke with us about it the other day about the opportunities that you can have post Bolic, post lieutenant time, and there's so many broadening opportunities as well that the Army offers you that you're able to grasp and run with it. And those are more geared toward the relevance of your future jobs in the military as well.
Zach, anything to add or slightly different perspective? Because you have both approached this problem from different angles.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So honestly, yeah, just like what Cam Grizzle was saying, don't focus on grad school as a lieutenant. That's not your job in the first 4 years of the Army. Every CCC is partnered with a local graduate school. So for instance, if you go to the maneuvers captain's career course, the captain's career course there is partnered with I think it's Columbus State right there in the local area. And you actually have to, write papers, do research papers. I think it's like 6 of them that will be graded by professors from Columbus State. And that program, CCC, counts for 6 hours toward your graduate degree. So you can knock out your degree there in basically a year and a half. And I think that's the same way for every other CCC. And then if you stay in through battery command or company command, company battery troop command, right before you take command, you should start looking at what you want to do as your broadening assignment. So your assignment after command, and there will be what's called a MILPER message. It'll come out and it'll have all your broadening career opportunities. And one of those is ACS, or what Captain Grizzle. So I'm doing ACS. Captain Grizzle is doing the West Point instructor route right now. There's also congressional fellowships, White House fellowships. You can go to Georgetown and get your degree there, and basically work with Congress or in Congress. I had a battalion commander who I think he was a fellow, and he was able to work with President Biden back when he was the vice president for about a year and a half. So there's a lot of cool opportunities out there. You just have to seek them out. And you have to be willing to talk to your battalion commander at the appropriate time.
Thanks. Go ahead.
I have a question about how sustainment really plays into supporting y'all. Like, do you guys get ammunition from a port support company, or how does that interaction kind of work?
Yeah, so I was a battalion S4 for a long time, and the question is, it depends on whether you are a light unit, heavy unit, rocket unit, but usually the forward support company will supply your ammunition, and it just depends on where. And there is I would say, song and dance called an R3P. And the R3P is essentially where you meet the FSC in a secluded location, a secure location, and your platoon sergeants and gunnery sergeants will usually, direct your ammunition loading entities into the R3P and out in a swiftly and timely fashion. And so that's kind of like the tactical way of ammunition support.
Is that refuel, rearm, resupply point, Cat, or something like that?
That's correct, sir. Yes.
You can speak logistics as a maneuver officer, just throwing it out there. But it's worth pointing out, think about at your individual level, the science that goes behind how much ammunition am I expending with my rifle? And then multiply the complexity by size of rounds, right? 105, 155s are really, really big bullets. The vehicles that transport them, to fuel just to get the vehicle there, the fuel to run the vehicles that either maneuver your guns or are your gun, like the self-propelled vehicles or the rockets, and all of the synchronization to get it from tens of kilometers, best case scenario, where it's waiting on a pallet to the vehicle that's going to employ it. It gets very complicated. So like in Navy CT, they do the math to make sure that works well. If you don't do the math in a light unit, you're going to find yourself without fire support. So that's really, really important. I'm glad you asked that question. Zach, anything to add?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I'll just say that, logistics and artillery, I think those are probably the two easiest measurable branches in the Army. You can tell if you have a really good logistics support team or a really bad one, depending on how quickly you're running out of bullets to support artillery.
From a leadership perspective, how do the different lieutenant positions like FSO, FDO, platoon leader, how do they differ and what can you learn from each?
I mean, so as far as like leadership, that's an interesting question. So like scope of responsibility as an FSO, you're responsible for roughly 13 people. As an FDO, you're responsible for 4 people. And as a platoon leader, you're responsible for 42 people, including the FDC. So the FDO technically works for the platoon leader. So typically your largest scope of responsibility, the biggest job as far as leadership is concerned will be your platoon leader. But as far as doing things on your own and owning things, I would say as an FSO you have a lot more autonomy and a lot more say in how your small organization is run, because basically as an FSO you're like a squad leader in regards to scope of responsibility.
Also, during your lieutenant time, you're never alone in terms of peers. As you get higher, obviously you have others that are working alongside of you. But I think the cool part about experiencing whatever position you're in is the peers that are surrounding you as you're going through your lieutenant journey, and you can kind of tell what peers you want to work with versus you don't. And you're able to see, oh, I kind of like the way that this platoon leader did this. Maybe I want to adopt that method, or hey, and share out as well. Hey, this is what I did, for weapons layouts the other day. I just wanted to share it with you all. Use it if you want to. But being a team player as well doesn't stop at your direct reports. It's also a peer leadership as well, which you all know, being in the Corps. But I would just add that point as well. Your peers can make or break your experience in your unit, and I think just with the Corps you have a leg up in terms of like how to network with your peers, and also how to conduct that peer leadership, especially when we talk about FSO, FDO, PL. Like XO is kind of that stepping stone from when there's 2 PLs usually in a unit, one's going to be XO. And so there's also that aspect as well. It's like who's going to be number two, who's going to be XO in that unit. It's just all based on, again, the relationships you have with your unit and you know how well you perform and how well your potential is as well in the unit.
Thank you.
Good morning. How will an infantry platoon leader best utilize an FO? What does that relationship look like? And then what type of support can an infantry officer give to the FSO?
I would say at the platoon level, just your relationship with your FO is just going to be understanding the overall scheme of fires and scheme of maneuver that the company commander and company FSO come up with. So just making sure that your FO understands what's going on, which is equally on the FSO's shoulders as it is the platoon leader's shoulders. You know, the major key event you're going to do as a platoon leader is going to be platoon live fires. And so if you want to rock those, just train your FO up and make them understand, you know, what you're trying to do.
Good.
I have another question pertaining to logistics and sustainment. How does, from an FAA standpoint, requesting ammunition work field? Is there like any predictive analytics there? Like, is a sustainment officer like predicting how much ammunition you're going to go through based off like the intensity of the fight you're going through, or you guys call it in and they bring it up to y'all?
Usually the your assessment is correct. Yeah, so the sustainment unit would already have those predictions. However, anything, no plan survives first contact in a sense. When you are running low, the executive officer of the battery usually gathers those statistics, those vital signs in a sense, and the XO usually has, you know, a fuel chart. Okay, like how much fuel can a paladin have, and where are you on the scope of needing more fuel, to ammunition, to food, to water. And so anything that you can think about that, you know, you go camping with, that keeps you alive, that's essentially, you know, passed up in reports to the battalion S4. And the battalion S4 kind of helps with assigning with the forward support company commander, you know, where to go next, or when should they plan either a resupply or an emergency resupply of all of those stuff, all of those things. That's it.
Yeah, kind of expand on what Captain Grizzle said. So technically your senior logistician and artillery battalion is going to be your battalion S4, which is actually typically an artillery officer. We don't have logisticians other than our FSC commanders. So usually the S4 will work in conjunction with the battalion FDO, and they'll establish basically you know, trigger points to trigger some form of automatic resupply. And then the S4 will work in conjunction with the FSC commander to set up those R3Ps. That's kind of how it works.
Go ahead. Got a question? Shout it out.
In regards to weapon systems, as an officer, how well do you have to like understand the weapon systems? You able to like perform maintenance? Is that in your job field, or is that more on the enlisted side of things?
While it's not in your job field, you should know. In terms of, I mean, I come from a heavy unit, and everybody, including the officers, were out there on maintenance Monday. And really, it's not more so you're turning wrenches, you're just there to support. You're there to support, you know, them filling out or see what they're doing and kind of like talk to them, interact with them. Maintenance Mondays, it's the first day of the week, and you're able to, just have more time with your service members. And your presence is one of the largest things I see in command climate surveys that are of challenging or critiques with commanders and officers. It's like, okay, well, like I know my officer does something, but I don't know what they do. They're always just on their computer, and that's not something that you want. You want to be immersive. Like you should want to know, where your service members are, coming from, like why they enlisted, why they continue to serve, and be able to tell your story as well, to just have that interrelational human relationship with people. But also in the scheme of things, you also need to know how to brief your commander on any maneuver or any maintenance challenges that your weapon systems might have. And so the more knowledgeable you are with your embedded maintainers that are in your unit, and also the relationship with the XO and the PLs of the forward support company, those are ones that are very good to have. And so ensuring that you're networking properly is also very important. And when you're an XO, you're the ones that also go to maintenance meetings along with your commander. And so when I was an XO, I was the one that like tracked, maintenance parts that were coming in from all over the nation to outfit our guns. And so you do, as you go through the jobs, gain experience with the maintenance side.
What did you not expect to have to do as an artillery officer, as an officer in general, that you think these cadets should be prepared for when they go out into the field?
We only have 7 minutes left. Go ahead, sir.
Just be prepared to do literally everything and anything. Don't ever assume that your soldiers are going to know how to do specific things. Don't ever assume that your NCOs are going to know how to do specific things. Like, keep your nose in the books as far as doctrine is concerned. Observe your peers. The Captain Grizzle was talking about. Observe the senior lieutenants in your organization, your captains. Not necessarily try to mimic what they're doing, right? But like take away the good and the bad, and just be prepared to literally do any and everything.
I think the two things I did very early, like the first 2 months I was at my unit, I asked a lot of questions to my peers, to my boss, and just out of blatant curiosity. And you're gonna see that, you're gonna observe something and be like, why is that thing the way it is in terms of operations, or kind of understanding the whole picture. And in the back of your mind, if there's a way that you can make it better, write it down. But also, I forgot the other thing I was gonna say. But also, yeah, again, establishing those relationships is super important, and understanding, where people are coming from, and understanding, just your scope of responsibilities in your job. Oh, counseling, that was the one thing. Counseling, that was super important. One of my first counselings I ever done was for a service member who is Native American, and they wanted to request to smoke peyote at their festival on leave. However, there is, again, rules and regulations for a lot of things. And I kind of had to counsel the service member on, the rules and ramifications of doing that at a festival, based on the fact that the request was not approved. And so that was a counseling I never thought I would have to write in my life, but that was like one of my within the first week of the job, they're like, hey man, we have a service member XYZ. I was like, oh, okay, sounds good. But just whatever comes your way, like don't like it's hard to say don't stress about it, but find an avenue in your self-awareness and self-mastery to digest the information and execute or work with someone that understands the bigger picture. And that's super important as a lieutenant too. Get the whole story. Don't pigeonhole yourself into one person telling you something and being like, what like just make sure that you have the whole story.
Any last minute advice for some of these folks who are, 3 months out from graduation about uniforms, equipment, stuff to do between graduation and arrival at BOLC?
Enjoy it. Honestly, you're never gonna have another experience like being a Virginia Tech Hokie in your senior year. And there's a lot of things to, I mean, we're people and we worry a lot. I wouldn't say to not worry in a sense, but just like work on yourself, work on your self mastery, your self assessment, understand in terms of leadership, being a manager, different ways that you can portray that. Where's your empathy level? Learn about emotional intelligence. There's a lot of leaders that I've dealt with that either lack or have emotional intelligence, and those are the ones with emotional intelligence are the ones I want to follow. And so with that, go to Sharky's Bingo, do all that stuff that you all do, that I know that you do, but also know that you are a professional, like you're a professional since your freshman year in the Corps, and prior to that, like wanting to do this profession. And so always remember that when you are out, and understand that like you carry at 21 years old, like you can be deployed right after BOLC. And so it's cool to like have that responsibility, but also you're always practicing like being a leader, being a manager, wherever you are. But thank you.
Thanks, Kat. Zach, any closing comments?
If you're given the opportunity to go to Ranger School, go. And then if your BOLC offers a pre-Ranger course, partake in it, because it's just going to make you physically better, even if you don't have a desire to go to Ranger School.
Double hua. Captain Griswold, Captain Skipworth, thank you for getting up, especially early for grad students to talk to these future officers. I really appreciate your professionalism and dedication to duty. Great example they've set for you. Once again, I commend you for coming out. You guys have an awesome day. You got the training meeting, don't forget, we got to get over to the classroom. Be safe. The roads are getting slick. There's school delays going on, so don't get crazy out there and fall on the sidewalks. Have a great day, guys. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys.
That's a little cool.